everybody, and welcome to another edition of Our Stories. Now, there's no one in the building except Pastor Rayshawn and myself, and our esteemed guest today, Fern Penstock. She's going to be sharing not only about herself, but her family's history and just how God has led. And I've just enjoyed all of these interviews and talks we've had in the last few weeks. And I believe you're going to enjoy this one as well. Before we start, let's start off with a word of prayer. Our dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much that you've been with each of us and that you formed us, made us, know us, and have given us these stories. So Lord, I pray especially tonight for Fern. May you be with her as she blesses us with telling of your leading in her life. We thank you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So Fern, thank you so much for coming, and we want to wish you on camera a happy belated birthday.
Thank you.
2 days ago, as I understand, 2 days ago you turned 96.
Right.
That's quite an accomplishment. So congratulations, and you're looking great, and we really appreciate you taking the time and effort to come and bless us with your story, because many of our church members, they were all telling me, oh, Fern has a good story. You need to get her to come. So I appreciate you coming and blessing us. So as we were talking a little bit beforehand, as I came to find out, you have quite a family history of how God led your family. Why don't we start with that? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, family history, that's what made me. Without all those ancestors, and some of them good, some of them bad, but without all of them, I wouldn't be who I am. I wouldn't be here. I marvel continually how God has led my family. Most of you have probably heard of Bloody Mary, Queen England, who made martyrs of many people, including one of my ancestors. We come down, it figures through the family, come down to the Mayflower time. My ancestry from that point is from a couple of young people from Britain who accepted the, well, it wasn't Protestant, but they left the Church of England beliefs and were persecuted. And they left Britain and moved to the Netherlands so that they could have freedom of religion. And then the Mayflower came up, and they thought, okay, we'll go on, we'll take that trip to America, where our family can worship the way they want, and our children can learn to can speak English like we want them to. We don't want them to grow up speaking a foreign language. So they did. They booked passage on the Mayflower. And before that sailing time, the young wife died and left him with the children in the Netherlands. And he decided that he would just go on that trip anyway, leave the children with the family they were staying with. And so he took the Mayflower and sailed across, and he was one of those people who died in the first 6 months. So how did I get Mayflower ancestry? A couple of years later, the children, people who were taking care of the children, booked them on the Mayflower again and sent them across. And that's where my connection, those children, I descended from those, I think it was, I don't know if it was a boy or a girl right now. That was the descent on the Mayflower. And I think they had a pretty rough time. But from there, it goes on down to Roger Williams of Advent fame, because he was the independent thinker. And he was exiled from the colony, the Mayflower colony, for his beliefs. And he founded the, Rhode Island, state of Rhode Island, with his religious beliefs. And that's how the trip came. And I didn't know all this until until we retired here 30 years ago. I discovered all this. I knew there was a family history somewhere. From Roger Williams, his daughter Mary, but girls don't count.
Hmm.
You find out very quickly that girls don't count, because if you are descended from a boy, oh great, tell us, you know. If you're a girl, well, of course she marries and she loses her identity. I could never understand as a little girl why a girl couldn't do anything but a teacher, a nurse. What's the other? Anyway, but girls had only certain avenues, and my parents were poor. Um, my father came from Minnesota. I don't know much about the Norwegian family. When a boy travels far from home, he doesn't carry his sister with him much. So
So your family, though, from Minnesota, that's quite a story. I did not know that about you. They went all the way back to the Mayflower. That's pretty incredible. So you're one of the first Americans, you know, non-Native Americans, and that religious strand. But somehow you ended up, as I understand, in Canada, right? Your family.
because my mother was part half Norwegian too, but
Hmm.
her Norwegian family lived in Canada, and they were prosperous farmers in Manitoba. But the family eventually split up, and most of them came to the United States, except my maternal grandfather. The rest became engineers and all kinds of fancy things. My family remained farmers, and they eventually moved to Montana. That was the land of promise for them. And my mother, my mother was a horsey person. She loved horses. I never loved horses. They were too big. They frightened me.
I don't like horses particularly either, for the same reason.
They were too big. But they eventually drove for after I don't know how many years. The drought drought conditions drove them out of Montana, and they decided to go back to Canada. And so they had this train of covered wagons with outriders and all kinds of stuff that I knew nothing about, but my mother could tell you. And they moved back to Canada, and chose a section way up north, well, north in Canada, into a well-occupied country, except that it was parkland. And if you wanted to farm there, you had to cut the trees down. North America's divided with the plains, the prairies, the parkland, the boreal forest, and on north. But they chose property, farmland, and they had to take all the trees out. I can remember as a little girl, my father and my grandfather cutting trees, heaps of trees that they'd cut down, and then burning them. And those were the beginning years. I was born early in that time when they were cutting trees, and I could remember it. I could remember the wild raspberries. This was prairie, not prairie. This was the parkland country where wild berries and things were native at that time yet. Eventually, my my father, well, that's prosperous country. And that country has never known a crop failure from that to then, no. And my family up there, they want to take a trip to somewhere to see, say, a movie or something or an opening. They just fly out to Montreal, Vancouver to take in an opening night and then fly back home.
Wow.
And it's good country, but my father, after several years of struggling really hard, I can remember we were poor, you know. You wouldn't call it dirt poor because of, but we on this farm that they chose, there wasn't in those days, there wasn't enough income to support a family. But I can remember um, trying to make a living, and I can remember they had a little can as a piggy bank. I can remember one year I was 3 or 4 maybe. My father was trying to figure out, how do we pay our taxes? And they went and took this can that was our piggy bank and had to take all the money out of there to pay taxes. And my father wasn't happy. And about a year later, he said, "That's enough. I'm going to BC, British Columbia." And that's how we ended up in British Columbia from his decision that day. It was very hard on my maternal grandmother and the family that was there because we were going to the ends of the earth. British Columbia, the ends of the earth, you had to travel through Alberta, and then you had to go into British Columbia. And this was in times, drought times, and poverty times. And they were wise at the border during British Columbia. We came with our car. My father had sold everything and bought this. I suppose it was a Model T, I don't know. But anyway, we were packed in there, and we came to the borders, the provincial line, and where are you going? BC. What are you gonna do? Well, you have to buy a British Columbia license for your car, because they knew what he didn't know yet was that you go to British Columbia, you stay. You don't go back to Saskatchewan. So they made him spend what little cash we had to buy a car license to take us on into British Columbia. And that was our introduction. Oh, I remember the wonderful, wonderful fruit. It was the autumn time, and the apples were falling off the trees in the orchards. And my brother, who was a year younger than I, and my sister, who was just about 2, I guess, at the time, going through the orchards where we stopped, picking up apples that had fallen from the trees and loading our arms, and they were falling off. And this was heaven for us, And then God led us. There was questions whether we would go on to the coast to Vancouver area, but the valley that we decided to live in, a friend from our Canadian experience, a farmer, had moved there. And so the valley that we chose was Grand Forks, at the confluence of the Granby and Kettle Rivers. And that had been a boom town in British Columbia during World War I, because there were mines, gold, silver, but copper was especially. And that area just boomed because copper naturally was in demand. The war ended, and the markets fell off totally, and it became the pioneers and people who could moved out, and that little town was left there with gold and silver mines. I can remember going through those mines as a child, and the copper particularly. And there was a railroad from the mines right down to the town to bring it down to a smelter where it was all smelted. And that was my introduction to childhood. And in the fruit areas, we could grow strawberries, we could grow all the things that never heard of when I was a child in
Mm.
Canada
Mm.
or in Saskatchewan.
In Saskatchewan.
But I was still an American. My parents, my father was still an American. He never changed his citizenship. All his life, he remained an American. And I just grew up with that idea. If I do the wrong thing, I will lose my American citizenship. My brother next to me, when we got into our teens, he worked for the post office and lost his American citizenship.
Mm.
My sister, a few years later, went on to work in the Parliament buildings in Victoria, lost her American citizenship. My youngest brother, when it came his turn,
So how many siblings did you have by this point?
I had one sister, one brother, one sister, and then a baby
And
brother.
then a baby brother. Okay, so 4 of you. Mm-hmm.
I can remember a sweet old lady saying, "Fern, how do you feel about having a baby in the family?" No way. I don't want a baby in the family. But I didn't know my mother was pregnant.
Oh.
And I was not a very good nursemaid.
Mm.
I never cared for babies.
Mm.
When I was going to school as a little girl, I can remember playing in the schoolyard, and the mother would go past the school pushing her perambulator, they called it, with a baby in it. Whatever the girls we were doing, they'd vacate the schoolyard and run over to the sidewalk and, ooh, oh, isn't it sweet? Isn't it cute? And I'd stand up. What's wrong with them? And I came to the conclusion they were just pretending that they liked that baby. And so I ran over and joined them. The Lord didn't give me a heart for babies. When I had my own boy, no one touched her. But the Lord gave us later on, when I was an adult and Floyd and I married, they gave us hearts for teenagers. I always related to the juniors. No one wanted juniors and everything. But at that time, we were not Adventists. We didn't know about it. But somewhere in that little valley in British Columbia, one day a colporteur came by. And my first contact with Adventists, I was standing in the yard watering wherever my mother went. It was always pretty. Flowers, lawns, whatever, to make it pretty. And I was watering flowers, I guess, with a hose. And this young man came in and smiled at me and knocked on the kitchen door. And my brother says, "Fern, turn the hose on that woodpecker." He thought it was a woodpecker. And I just stood there and smiled, but it was a young man selling Uncle Arthur's bedtime stories. And I didn't know it. Anyway, my mother bought one of those bedtime stories books, and that was introduction to Adventism, but we didn't know it. Several years later, this came down to World War II, the beginning of World War II. My father was an American, and he was a person non grata because he was an American living in Canada. And there is prejudice. There was prejudice. But he couldn't join the army because of a health condition. So he went off to Vancouver to get a job, where he could get a job. And my mother stayed with the family back. This story went on, and this Adventist minister from a nearby town, an Adventist lady had moved into the area, and she was a missionary, really and truly. She just, everybody she could lay hands on voice, but she talked about Jesus and everything, And somehow it got to my mother. who had always wondered from the time she was young why no one worshiped on Saturday instead of Sunday, because she had read in the Bible about Saturday. So when this woman contacted her, well, that sounds interesting. And so this woman started having a Sabbath school. And first Sabbath, my mother went, my brother and I, no way, we're not going there. My mother said, you're going.
Hmm.
And I was probably about, I was at least 15.
Hmm.
And okay, mom says you go, you go. So my brother and I and this baby brother started attending this Sabbath school. It was so interesting. We went voluntarily in the weeks that followed.
Hmm.
It was so interesting, you know. We didn't know anything about the Bible. I had gone to United Church, and that was a dear old minister. My parents, my father wouldn't join there because he said all they want is our money. But that was the sweetest old pastor, you know.
Hmm.
And so I did know a few things about the Bible. My closest neighbor was Catholics, and we knew that they couldn't come with us. We couldn't come to them unless they went to confession or something. And the other influence was the Church of England, the Anglican Church. And I got some Bible lessons from there. So I knew a little bit about the Bible. But eventually, you know, my father was at the coast and my mother decided to become an Adventist. And it was not, it was an unacceptable choice.
Hmm.
Because I mean, all of our neighbors, they were not really religious people, you know, they lived good lives. But this Sabbath school, you know, my father came back from the coast into the war, and people had been writing to him, your wife, she's joined up with this bunch of fanatics, and then she's going to church on Saturday, and she's doing this and doing that. And then my father wrote her a letter that he threw away before he sent it because he was really came down hard on her. But he came back Christmas that year, and they had to settle this religion. And he thought, okay, I know enough about the Bible. We'll take care of this real quick, like. So he set out when my mother, the kids, and I went to this home Sabbath school. My father says, stop at the store and get me a box of snuff. No way. You know, we didn't tell him that, but we wouldn't do it.
Hmm.
And he thought, what's going on? My kids won't even get me a box of snuff when they're going past the store. So then he was going to prove from the Bible. We'd go, and then there was one Bible in the home. He would go to that Bible and start looking for the Sabbath. He knew it had been changed, but he couldn't find it. Then he'd hear us coming home and hide the Bible. And this went on for several weeks. We didn't know it. He was trying to find where the Sabbath had been changed.
Hmm.
It didn't work. And then from Vancouver, where the conference headquarters was, a minister came out and talked to them. And I remember him talking to my father, and my father saying, well, you know it was changed. The minister says, no, it wasn't. Yes, it was. It was changed. I don't know. I can't find it, but it was changed. And the minister said, look at that calendar on the wall. So my father looked around him. The minister says, which day is the seventh day? Oh. And you know, my father changed his stand right then, seeing that calendar and the seventh day. And just a few months later, we moved to a place where he could put the children.
You just moved in here a little bit. That's okay.
where the children could go to a church school.
Hmm.
All my childhood treasures. I was an artist from the day I was born, and so all through school, I had all my drawings and paintings that I had done through school stacked like so. And our school was different. All of that stuff was paid for by the school. We didn't have to pay by pens or paper or anything. It was supplied. It was a new enterprise started by the government. But I had all this stacks of stuff. What am I going to do with my treasures? And you know what I did? I threw them away.
Hmm.
I left them there because we had to pare right down to the bare minimum to make this move. I was so scared. I knew that these Adventist kids were going to be so good. I was such a sinner. I wouldn't fit in, and all on and on and on. You know what happened? I had an education when I met all those Adventist kids in that church school. I found out that they were just like me, maybe worse in some cases. But that was one of my first places where I had to think what I was going to do. And it was good for me. And my brother next to me, he made the same decision. We moved to another town where there was a church school, and that dear old Adventist minister and his wife, they had been missionaries in Haiti
Hmm.
years ago.
Hmm.
And they were so good to us. And my mother was already baptized, but we came to my brother and I, this minister, would you like to be baptized? Sure. So my brother and I were baptized in the Okanagan Lake, but my father wanted to be baptized, and the minister said, "You're still smoking and chewing snuff." Well, yeah, but I'll quit. No, we won't baptize you until you've made that break.
Hmm.
And my father wanted to be, baptized, and he put a package of cigarettes on the table one morning, and he said, "That's it, no more." And he didn't smoke anymore. My mother left it there for several weeks, and he never touched it. The next thing was snuff.
Hmm.
And in case people don't know, that was this tobacco thing,
Mhm.
on box.
Hmm.
And he had that to break it. But eventually he left all those things. He learned to keep the Sabbath. He learned how to prune apple trees in the orchards. They don't do that this day. We're talking about 60, 70 years ago when life was totally different.
Hmm.
But he became a Seventh-day Adventist. And one of the first things we had to meet was problems in the church. And people said, well, it's all those new Adventists. We weren't the only new people there. And they said, but it's all those new Adventists bringing all these bad cultural things to the church. And my parents were ready to leave the church, bang, just like that.
Hmm.
But that minister was so dear, he came out to them. He said, I know who's saying those things. I know what they're saying, but you listen to me. And he explained to my father
Hmm.
the background of the Sabbath, and that he could understand again. And my father said, okay, that's it. And they accepted Ellen White even.
Hmm.
That was a cultural change.
Hmm.
And eventually my father accepted all of those edgy things, and he became the most firm supporter of the Adventist Church for the rest of his life. You
Hmm.
couldn't talk him out of it.
Hmm.
And he was just faithful. And those are my years to my teens.
Hmm.
Eventually the end of my teens. And I went away to a university in Alberta.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember the name, but
I think it's Berman University now.
Canadian Junior College then
Mm-hmm.
during the war. And I told my mother, my friends were going and we had no money. And I told my mother, if I cannot go away to school with my friends who are going, then I'm quitting this church. I'm joining the people that I know about, and I will not go to church anymore. And she believed me. I think I meant it. But she believed me, and boy, she just did everything she could.
Hmm.
And my father made me a wooden box. Couldn't afford a trunk, but he made me a wooden box. I packed all my things in,
Mm-hmm.
and off to school I went.
And you were there for how many years? And it seemed like you met a certain young man during that time of life, huh, Fern?
It was a very small. I think the total enrollment was about 80 students because it was the war. All the young men had gone off to war, and yeah, we were just little kids.
Mm-hmm.
He was just a little farm boy, but his mother's dream was that he would go to school and get an education. That was it. But she, so I fit in pretty good. I really had the Adventist message in my heart. It was really there in my heart, but I was silly. I was silly and immature, I think, but I had made good friends, and one or two of the young people from the school I'd been going in British Columbia was there, and I'm still friends with her. Well, she's far, far away. I'm a few months older than she is. She'll be 96 in October. But yeah, skating was the big thing then. If you didn't skate, you're a hard up. I came from British Columbia, where the ponds froze, but the ice was thin, and so skating wasn't really big. And he was a good skater, and he played hockey with those young boys. But I didn't know him. But he was French class. We were taking French together. This row of students alphabetically. The teacher went A, B, C down the line. And Floyd Penstock, I didn't know him. But when they came down to Fern Sandness, he paid attention because I spoke with this queer accent. And he couldn't see me, but he liked that accent. And eventually in French class, after class, and then another class or two, we met, but we were too young to escort and date and do things like that. So we skated, and we skated, and we skated, and we went on hikes. I mean, it was a small enrollment, about 80 students, and they'd take us on long Saturday night hikes, through the moonlight. Somehow we managed to get marching together. And then they had what they called marches. Do you know what that is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Heard of them. I never participated, but heard of them.
Well, actually, it was square dancing. We didn't know that. But yes, eventually, and then all the young men from the war came back, and my husband, instead of being one of the stars, he started by baseball. I couldn't care less about baseball. But I started going to baseball games because Floyd always played baseball. And he was good. He was very athletic. And that's eventually I couldn't continue school because, well, of health problems and things. And his mother was in bad health. And so he quit school and he went to they gave us intelligence tests, IQ tests. Those are, they gave us IQ tests. And when they told us the results, I don't know what my results were. It must have been blowing in the wind or something. But with Floyd took those tests, and he was in about the 95th percentile for engineering.
Hmm.
And the interpreter of the results didn't tell him what his score was. He just said, you go to Calgary and take farm mechanics. And he thought, I'm too stupid to go down to college.
Hmm.
Took him the rest of his life, and he never did get over the idea that he was too stupid.
Hmm. So Fern, from Canadian Junior College at that time, you're now with Floyd, and I assume you guys got married.
We grew up and became adults. And yes, our romance continued. We were not popular students. We were not in the leaders or anything. We were just people.
Mm-hmm.
But 4 years later, after he was back to the farm and I was in British Columbia, he, his mother and his grandmother and his little brother got in the car and drove out to British Columbia to our wedding.
Hmm.
And we got married, and it was winter, cold. And on the way back that was our honeymoon. Mother, grandmother, and little brother. We stopped at Glacier National Park, Glacier. I think it was Montana.
Yep.
My beautiful wedding bouquet all froze. But we were on our way into adulthood. And
So where did you settle? Did you start a family, I assume, after that? Because I want to make sure we have time for your because you did something very interesting with mission work, and I want to make sure we have time for that.
He started teaching,
Hmm.
and he could only go a certain place. He hadn't graduated yet, so he was accepted in Newfoundland to teach in schools over there.
Wow.
And that was a foreign country for us Westerners.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't talk like us. They didn't live like us. It had just joined the Canadian Confederation. That was our introduction to mission work.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. And we think we spent about 10 years there. And in that time, we had no family. We had no child. In that family, we decided that we'd been long enough. He'd go back and get his BA. And would you believe it? Within months, Fern was pregnant. After 7 years of married life. Oh, we can't go back to school. And I said, yes, you've got to. We went down to AUC, and he got his Bachelor of Arts and came back to Newfoundland. And by then we had learned that Canada was pretty big. Yeah. We thought Toronto, when we lived in the West, was halfway. It was all Canada. We got Toronto the first time, and we were only halfway across the country. What a shock. But we went back after he got his Bachelor of Arts at AUC. That's where our baby was born. We went back to Newfoundland for several years, and we had an invitation. People probably haven't heard now of Gerald Minchin. He was one of the leaders in the denomination. And his daughter and I were friends from the time we were foolish, as she put it. But he had recommended us for India. And all at that time, Canadians were going to India. But we had this child coming up. She was just 10 or something. She needed dental work. And then we'd accepted the call and discovered that we would have to send her away to school. That was pretty serious. And all of our friends had done it. We said, no, thank you. We're not sending our child away to school, even though it's a mission school. And I'm so glad. And she's so glad that we never did that. She was shy and everything. So we went back to Newfoundland for several years. And then we got a call to Africa. No one ever wanted to go to Africa, including us. But we did. we went to Africa, to the most civilized country in Africa, where it's the safest, Liberia. And Liberia was where all the American slaves were repatriated to Africa, those who wanted to go. And then we arrived in Africa, and the mission president kept driving and driving and driving, and we never saw the town. We never, what's happening here? Well, where is Monrovia? We're in it. It had been a flourishing place when the Americans repatriated the slaves, and the slaves had taken over and ran the government. But of course, things went downhill. And we'd only been there a few months, and there was the revolution when the, I guess you'd call it a rebellion. The government changed hands. There was no longer, well, it just changed hands. The rebels came across from across the border in Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, and were devastating the country. Our things hadn't arrived from America yet, and we just wanted to call the GC, stop that boat, take our stuff off the boat. But it's too late. It was mid-ocean then. And we, as things deteriorated, and the rebel forces started coming across from Ivory Coast, some decisions had to be made, and we decided that all the expat missionaries should go home. The mission president didn't decide that. Us missionaries who were out in the country, no telephones, no nothing. But we'd gotten word through the American embassy. And we decided that all the expat missionaries should go home. And the mission said, women and children. The missionaries said, fathers with their families. And that's what we sent them off until they came down to the school principal and Floyd, my husband, who was kind of in charge of religion and everything, head of all of the churches. And we were still there. And we decided then reservations for the principal's wife and I to go out next. But we had decided that we weren't going without our husbands. I don't know why, but I said, I'm not going without my husband. If my husband stays, I stay. And she said, if my husband stays, I stay. And they had already spent about 14 years in mission schools in Africa. So we sent out the mission families with fathers with their children. They took our reservations, the fathers did. And we didn't know it. These rebels were all around us. We had no idea. They were, if you know about driver ants, these ants that go through, they're ants that go through and then clean everything out as they go. I mean, they came to the house we were living in, and people move out and let the ants go through and clean it up, everything. When the ants are gone out the other side, you can move back in again. The house is clean, all crumbs and everything. Anyway, we decided that we'd better be going. And just the morning we decided that we should be going, the rebels took over, came right down through all around us, and we didn't know it. We had gone to church that morning, taking a dugout canoe across the river, walking through the rubberman plantations to this little church that was 4 sticks in the ground, logs to sit on, and we had church. we came back home, and my husband and the principal, what are we gonna do with our cars if we leave? Well, we'll take them to one of these schools. And the native said, no, no, no. The rebels are all around us. Don't leave your car with us. And that very day, my husband and the principal decided that they better find out about exit visas. We had applied. You can't leave some countries without an exit visa.
Mm-hmm.
So they started out to get these exit visas. Before they just got down the highway a few miles, and people with guns coming up out of the ditches, shooting at them. And the principal says, I think somebody's telling us something. They turned around and came back, and there was one bullet hole in the car, in the frame on the right side. So one bullet had hit them. And then, well, we were there. They were there. The next morning, we were on the porch discussing what to do, and our two boys that worked with us came out and said, you got to come with us. Oh, can we get dressed first? And they took us up the highway where the rebel leaders were. And Halloween masks on. This was maybe frightening to Africans, but not frightening to us. I thought it was funny. They didn't think it was funny. Anyway, what are you doing here? We were told that all the missionaries, everybody was gone. Well, we're here. Well, we'll send you back to campus, but you must stay on campus. You must not, you stay at your houses. And we had a big campus. You must stay on the campus. Don't leave the campus, don't run, don't do anything, we'll shoot you. And they meant it. Their leader at that point in that section was a man who had been trained in Liberia, that other town in Gaddafi.
In Libya.
Yeah, Libya. He'd been trained in Libya. I was scared of him. Most of them I wasn't afraid, but I was afraid of him. He was dead serious. Anyway, they sent us back to campus, and all the teachers and everybody that were there. The campus had emptied because the rebels had been down through the rubber plantations and the palm plantations, oil palms, and they had seen all these students, and they knew that they were mostly students of government officials. And they said their plan was to come onto campus and line all the students up and have people identify who the students were, and they were going to shoot them. We didn't know that at the time. But yes, they came down and they took over, and all the teachers and everybody had moved away from the highway. We were farthest from the highway. Everybody moved in with us, but they were killing and murdering. We could hear the guns shooting all the time, and every time. And our boys who were working for us said, they're killing people down there on the river all the time. You want to come down and see? No, thank you. But that's what was going on. And there was an American black man who had come back to Liberia. He'd retired, and he was mining for diamonds. And he wanted to go back to America. They were going to ship us back to America. So he came and said, will you take me back with you? And we said, sure. And but his woman maid that was working for him was another tribe. And the rebels came to the house and they said, okay, who's this other tribe? And they could tell the way they talked, you carry an accent. Every tribe carried an accent. And so this woman from another tribe and her children, they shot them, killed them right on the spot, right there. And That's the way the rebels were going through the country. If you were the wrong tribe, fortunately, the boys working for us, one was the child of an American slave who had been repatriated, so he had U.S. citizenship. The other one was from a tribe, I would call them superior, because they were different than most of the tribals. Education was important to them, tribal rules and everything. And I learned a lot. I did a real education there. And I appreciated those people. And they appreciated the opportunities they had. One of the trees, the one that was the native tribe, he says, we'll bring you a treat. Treat? Yeah. He said, we go out and we cut down palm trees, and in the tops of the top palm trees, these butterflies or something lay their eggs, and then the worms live at the top of eat the palms hearts out. We'll bring you some of those. We get them, and then we sell them for 5 cents a piece. I never ate any grubs. They called them palm drugs, and that was a treat. Eventually, we had to leave. We stayed as long as we could, because as long as we could help the people. But eventually, of course, the dormitories emptied of students, and the rebels and local people moved in. And eventually it said, well, we'll have to move out too. And what the rebels did, they went to a mine, American coal, well, can't remember what it was, some kind of a mine, diamonds or something. And they stole a couple of cars, because our car was, oh, I didn't tell you about our car. We had this almost brand new Jeep Cherokee, and that's what we were worrying, where we'll leave this, so we'll get it when we come back. Well, the rebels, of course, came, and there was this Jeep sitting in the yard. Okay, so we want it. Well, take it. They couldn't find anyone who could drive an automatic drive. So the Jeep sat there for a week while they searched around everywhere to find someone who could drive an automatic vehicle. Eventually, they came and got it. But we determined that we better be leaving. But while they took us down to the boys' dormitory and sat us in a circle, and now tell us who you are, you know. And some of the teachers were from other countries, African countries. So they didn't touch them. They didn't want to harm us because they wanted the U.S. government to join them in the rebellion. But couldn't do that. But they said, well, we'll take you out now. We'll give you 2 weeks. We'll come back with a stole of a bun from the mine, and we'll come back and get you. You can have 1 suitcase each, and you have to decide what you're going to take in that suitcase. Well, what do you take? You've got a house full of stuff that's just arrived from America, and we have to pare it down to a suitcase each. We took all the slides of pictures, our family pictures and things, except the one thing that I should have taken. I'd taken a piano, and sitting on the end of the piano was my daughter's wedding album that I had taken out and been looking at. Well, when it came down, you've got 1 suitcase so big, and you've got 2 or 3 people who are coming, suitcases. You decide. I picked up my daughter's wedding album, and I looked at it. We'll be back in a few weeks. It'll be there. I never saw it again, of course, because the rebels evacuated us across up country, and they were good to us. I'll give them credit. They were good to us. We didn't know what we were headed into, because this was one of the rebel leaders taking us out. He was their man who arranged all their what do you call them, attacks, attacks on traffic and everything. And he arranged all that, but got this car and he loaded us in, and that American who had come back, he was with us, and they took us up country. We really had, it was a matter of faith, a matter of faith. But just before we left, they took us out and they said, now, they'd already told us, you don't walk, you don't run, we'll shoot you. And we took that seriously. But that same evening, they had these missionaries from another African country. I can't remember the country, but they had come to teach in the school. And he and his wife were sitting there with their little boy, and there were other people around this circle. I was on this side of the circle, Floyd was on the other. And he could see that if they decided to shoot, I was right in line where the shooting was I would be hit. So he motioned me, move, move. I finally caught on, I moved around. But this man that I was afraid of, he got up and he started marching around the circle, how they were going to kill us, kill everybody, and especially that missionaries. And if you've ever been, I know you've been moved by the Holy Spirit, and I must blame this on God, on the Holy Spirit. This man started walking on the outside of the circle, pointing at people. And one of these African missionaries and his wife, they were going to be killed. And I can't explain it. I just got up out of my seat. I had no inkling of what I knew what I was doing, but I had nothing except that I started following this man around the circle, pleading with this man and his wife. Don't kill them. You can see that they're just missionaries. We have no weapons, but they found one gun, an old gun. Where are the bullets? We don't have bullets for this gun. If you have a gun, you must have bullets. And I followed him around the circle there, pleading for that family. And finally, he looked around. He said, "Woman, stop following me." I stopped following him. And then they took us out a few days later. But the mission would take us out, the division would move us out because we were from far away. They invited us to come, but these missionaries from other countries had come as a financial assistance, so they couldn't move them out. They took us up country, and Floyd had sprained his foot as we were loading our stuff. And these rebels were so kind of, watch that old man now, he's hurt his foot. And they took us, we went a government guest house. We slept on the ground. And this rebel leader, he said, now we're going to stop at my house on the way. And we didn't know what we were facing. But we took him to his house and we said, Lord, you know what they're doing with us. They took us away and took us to Ivory Coast. We arrived in Ivory Coast. We couldn't speak French. Well, we'd taken French in school. The one word I could remember was, we were out of food. And one word I could remember was pain, is bread. So we went out into this town when the rebels dropped us off, looking for bread. Every place we went, pain. Until we find a little shop at the end of the day that had bread. They put us on buses to what's the capital of Ivory Coast?
Côte d'Ivoire, or how do you say? I don't know how to say it. Côte d'Ivoire, or no, that's
Oh, we'd lived
I
there
don't
for
remember.
weeks, but I can't remember now. Anyway, it's still, I don't think it's the capital anymore. But we stayed there for several weeks while
Hmm.
they tried to decide what to do with us when they moved us over to the Gambia.
Hmm.
I remember I had this sewing machine. It was heavy. We were on our way now to the Gambia. And I was carrying this thing, and this woman comes along. She's got this load on her head. She says, "Put it up, put it up." And she was waltzing around with this load on her head.
Hmm.
Of course, I couldn't even carry a flea on my head.
Hmm.
The Lord took care of us.
Hmm.
We never really felt in danger. We came back to the United States. General conference was on. No one knew what to do with us. We came home July the 4th, and the celebration started. We were at our daughter's place. We were just going to bed, and all the shooting started. We flat on the floor
Hmm.
because we'd come from where
Yeah.
the shooting was. A few weeks later, but general conference is over, they moved us back and said, "We're sending you to this other English-speaking country, the Gambia, named after the Gambia River."
Hmm.
And so we were there. Floyd was principal, headmaster of a 600 student
Hmm.
government school there. I loved it.
Hmm.
I hate Africa,
Hmm.
but I loved meeting the people.
Hmm.
I loved meeting the people. It was so much fun.
Hmm.
And learning their history.
Hmm.
We stayed there for till our 3 years, next 3 years. And Floyd turned 65, and he said, "I have to go now."
Hmm.
So we came back. The Lord was with us.
Hmm.
As we traveled through on that trip out with a rebel leader and his bodyguard and us Americans in the car, the farther up country we got, the more wild it got. We kept getting stopped and stopped and stopped. And finally we began seeing posts by the road with skulls on them.
Hmm.
The rebels, they wanted skulls.
Hmm.
They wanted people's skulls. So they'd kill someone, put the skull on a post,
Hmm.
or bury it in an anthill until the ants had cleaned it all up. Then they'd put it up and point it out as we drove by.
Hmm. Put a little fear in your hearts.
It was enough to make you think twice.
Yeah, I'm sure it was.
Kind to us as
Yeah.
they do, and his bodyguard, he was the youngest child of a man who had 14 children,
Hmm.
14 wives, I'm sorry, and 50 some children.
Wow.
Tribal religion. He was handsome, he was tall, he was intelligent. And yet those wars just tore the country apart. That's my revelation.
So you never went back, never got any of the other things out of your,
No.
that one suitcase, never.
Floyd went back when we moved to the Gambia. We moved, he got an opportunity to go back with Adra. And they said, okay. He said, "I want to see if I can find my Jeep." Well, we got back there and he found his Jeep all right. He was in an Adra car, and here pulling up behind them was his Jeep, battered to bits. They'd learned to drive it. And you couldn't take it back.
Yeah.
But we had these wonderful experiences in the Gambia then. The American consulate at one point arranged to take a bunch of Americans on a trip to the village where Kunti Kinta or Kintu Kunti, this African slave that became very, very famous, searching his family, to take us to his village, which wasn't far away. So there was room on the bus, and they threw us in too. We went to this village where all his family, all this tribal family lived, but they weren't living like the people we knew.
Yeah.
But they were nevertheless living there. And that was when the time the Americans were having shuttles, and every place the shuttle was going over around the world, they'd send a plane load of American personnel in case it became a problem, and it came down before it got to its destination. And so among this plane load of pilots was a young Black American pilot, highly trained to go on a mission like this, but he was on the bus with us. And we visited the village, and he came around and looked at everything, and we got on the bus to go back, and we saw the places where they sold slaves and everything. We got on the bus. I was sitting beside him returning it. And conversation, I said, "You've seen the village now. You've seen how Africans live. Have you ever wondered where you would be if your family had not been taken slaves?" Silence. No, he'd never even thought of the advantages he had, even out of a terrible thing like slavery. He was highly educated and had all the world before him to live his life. So the Lord works things out.
Even in bad situations. We have just a couple minutes left. Do you want to just say a little bit of coming here to Orlando and Markham Woods for?
We tried to decide where we were going to retire, and this one missionary family, they were from Panama, were coming to Florida. Why Florida? I was from the West, Pacific Northwest, California. That was my territory. Why Florida? Well, Florida has good living conditions, good cheap prices are cheap on everything, and work it's very nice. Oh, sounds pretty good. And actually, we decided to come to Florida. And we did. And we were looking for a place to live, and we were with the Courtings, which of course were family.
Yeah.
And stayed with them for a while, and they brought us to Markham Woods Church. Wow. We don't have to be leaders. We don't have to teach Sabbath school. We don't have to preach. We don't have to do anything that we've been doing for 4 years. We joined Markham Woods Church. But we did look around.
Yeah.
We looked around. We went to this church. Even people that I knew in British Columbia lived there. No, don't like it. Okay, there's this other church. Don't like the color scheme. Don't like the decorations. Other church. They're just building a new church. I don't want to join a new church and have to pay for a new church. And Curtings had brought us here, and Doug Foley was the pastor at the moment, but Jim Coughlin took over. We fell in love, and we never went church hunting after that. It was such a wonderful experience to come to a church like Markham was, and it was a small church then. The tent membership was only over 600. And one of the first people that we met was Mark Bueller at Potluck, and he looked up and he said, "I know that man." And he came over and spoke. Floyd was his principal in church school in British Columbia. And Markham Woods has, I can't tell you, of the wonderful experiences Markham Woods has been to us. The pastors, the people are always so kind. They treated us like people. It's just great. We love Markham Woods Church, and I'm so sorry that things have turned out since the pandemic. I couldn't return to church, and Floyd passed away. I'm still a church member.
You are. And that's why we wanted you to share your story, Fern. I'm really grateful that you have taken this time to go through such a rich life, 96 years, so many interesting experiences. I think we could keep on going for...
This whole area is...
I'm sure.
I missed Asia. I missed lots of things, but The Lord has been so good to us, and Jane knows all about Singapore and
Mm-hmm.
Bangkok and places like that. I've had the most wonderful education. I love learning.
Mm-hmm.
And Markham Woods has just been and meeting you has been a privilege because I never knew you before. You
That's
became
true.
pastor, and
That's true. We never
I've
met.
not met your wife or family, but I've seen their pictures.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Fern. Usually we end these by, if you would allow me to pray for you, that the Lord will continue to lead and guide you.
Thank
So
you.
let's just bow our heads for prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I want to thank you for Fern. Lord, what an inspiring story. So many years, so many different experiences. Lord, I pray that you will continue to be with her, continue to stand by her, give her strength, Lord, and just thank you for the inspiration that you give through these stories, that in the face of danger, we can be brave and we can know that you are with us. Lord, may you continue to bless and guide us all. We thank you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. And thank you.
Thank you, Fern.
It's a privilege to belong to Markham Woods Church.
Well, it's a privilege to have you as a church member with such rich experiences. If you miss parts, next time we do this series, we'll have you back for part 2.
Well,